So welcome to Lectio 6, right? This is chapter 8 of Eutropius. It's a little bit of a longer section, and just a public service announcement, they're doing yard work behind my building right now. So they seem to be finished, but if you start to hear large machinery going off, my apologies. So just going back to the state of things where we left off, right? Sulla is he's marching back to Rome. He encounters the consuls, right? The Roman consuls who've been sent to essentially fend him off, right? And no issues whatsoever. He wipes them out. Sulla is obviously being described as a very, very skilled leader, skilled general. And not only does he wipe out a lot of them, but some of them just surrender. Right? So after a pretty bloody battle for the Romans, they just kind of surrender to him without any fight. And there's the lawn equipment. Here we go. So we pick up right here, said, right? But cum Romae. So when we see cum and Romae, this is definitely cum clause cum, particularly with these big subjunctives, essent and accepescent. Romae is that rare locative form, so in Rome. Mutati consules essent. So what we have here is our verb, mutati essent, and then our subject is kind of in the middle there. So my verb is third plural. It's pluperfect passive subjunctive. And then you have consules in the middle there. So your nominative subject kind of got trapped in the middle of the verb, which sometimes happens. Next line we have Marius, right? He is in the nominative case, and he's described as Marius Marii Filius. So he's Marius, son of Marius, right? So this is Marius's the main Marius. This is his son. En Papirius Carbo, consulatum. Sorry guys, I waited as long as I could for the lawn people to finish up, but they are having a blast. Pluperfect active. Okay. So we're in a cum clause, right? Cum clauses give me more information. When is always a good place to start and see where you get from there. But cum Romae mutati consules essent, when the consules, when the consuls mutati essent had been changed, consuls had been changed in Rome. You don't get an and here, but you probably want an and. When the first part says the consuls had been changed, the second part of the sentence is just telling you what that meant. So we might put an and in here. And Marius, son of Marius, imagine that. Hey, Caitlin. When Marius, son of Marius, and this guy, Papirius Carbo, consulatum, that's the consulship, accepescent, when they had accepted the consulship. So in the first part of the line, it says when the consuls had been changed. The second part is these are the guys who took on the consulship, which is why there's no and in between those two things. It's just restating what he means when he says the consuls had been changed. So Marius, OG Marius, has died. Right? He dies in this interim period as Sulla is heading back. So when the new consuls are chosen, Marius' son and another guy by the name of Carbo, when they had taken on the consulship, aka when they had become the consuls, Sulla contra Marium, and of course at this point we're talking about Marius Jr., that's why they refer to him as Juniorem, dimicavit. Third singular, perfect, right? So this is just a straight up, when those two had become consuls, Sulla dimicavit, they love that verb, dimicavit, fought contra Marium, against Marius Junior, Marius Jr. We'll call him Marius' son. Sulla fought against Marius Jr. and quindecim millibus eius. So this word here, millibus, is in the dative case because of this verb, perdo. So we have a dative here. Oops. So quindecim millibus eius, and that eius is very, very important because it means of the other guy. So 15,000 of the other guy's soldiers. Then we get okisis de suis quadraginti. Quadraginti, that's 400. Those are actually in... yeah. I think this would be an ablative absolute. Okisis here being the participle, and then the... So there are a lot of words that have been left out here, so I'll explain in just a second. And we have our third singular, perfect. So we have here as our main verb, perdidit. So Sulla fought against Marius Jr. and perdo, which here kind of just means killed 15,000 of his, meaning of Marius. He killed 15,000 soldiers of Marius. And then this ablative absolute here with 400 de suis, with 400 of his own okisis having been killed. So he killed 15,000 of Marius's soldiers with 400 of his own having been killed. So this is once again another one of those, probably an embellishment here, right? Sulla fights against Marius Jr.'s army. He knocks off 15,000 of Marius Jr.'s soldiers. He only loses 400 of his own. That kind of feels a little bit lopsided to me. So again, perdo, taking the dative here, he killed rather, 15,000 soldiers of Marius with 400 de suis, with 400 of his own okisis having been killed. Another classic Sullan victory. Mox, soon, also, urbem ingressus est, and they keep using this verb, third singular, this is the perfect, it's a deponent. Ingredior means to enter, and in this situation we're talking about entering the city, not just coming home, but taking over the city. So, soon, he too entered the city. This is also a callback to Marius in a previous line. Marius entered the city. Hey, Johnny. So he too, meaning Sulla, goes back into the city. Marium in the accusative. Forgot to change my sizes here. Give me 1 second. All right. Marium in the accusative. Marii filium. I don't know why he doesn't just say Marium uniorem here, but it's the way he's chosen to do it. Praenesta is a city. It is neuter, so it's actually accusative here. Persecutus here is our nominative participle. Then we get our main verb here. We get obsedit, third singular, and then we get ad mortem compulit, third singular, perfect. So Sulla entered the city. Then we get this lovely participial phrase here. So persecutus, persequor means to follow or to chase. So having followed is, kind of a basic translation you could use for a participle here. It's not having been followed. How do I know that? Because this verb is deponent. So when you have a deponent, you can't do having been verbed. It's having verbed. Having followed Marius Jr., Marius, son of Marius, having followed him to Praeneste, obsedit, which we've seen that verb before. He besieged him. I think that's not how you spell it. I-E. He besieged him and compulet. If you think in English, the first principal part of that verb would be compello. So he compelled ad mortem. Literal translation, he compelled him to death. He forced him to death. This is something that would happen very often. You might not be the one to land the killing blow, but if you've surrounded your enemy and they know there's no hope, a lot of times what they will do is just take their own life. So he besieged him and forced him to die, we would probably say. Essentially, he forced him to take his own life. So again, this participial phrase, it's nominative, which means it's describing Sulla. Sulla is the guy. So you could say having followed Marius Jr., or you could say after he followed Marius Jr. to Praeneste, he besieged him and forced him to take his own life. So now big Marius is gone. Little Marius is now gone. And Rursus, one more time. Pugnam in the accusative. Gravissimam in the accusative. Habuit. Contra, which of course preposition takes the accusative. So we have contra lamponium et carinatem. Duces here could be nominative, could be accusative, but we have lamponium in the accusative singular. We have carinatem in the accusative singular. So it makes sense here for this to be accusative plural, because Lamponius and Carinas are the duces partis Mariani. And then we have a little prep phrase here. Big ack. Okay. So versus can mean again, back. It has a couple different meanings here. But I think the idea here is he fought against little Marius, and then he was back in battle, right? So I think again is probably... Again, he habuit. He had a pugnam gravissimam. He had a very serious fight. I mean, serious is a weird word to describe that. The idea here, I think, is a very consequential, probably very bloody. He had a very serious fight contra, against. Always translate names in the nominative. Lamponium would be Lamponius. And carinatem, if you think about your tem kind of words, they usually start as tas. So cari, in this case, carinas, carinatus. So against Lamponius and Carinas, the leaders, the generals of partis Mariani. So pars can obviously means part, but in the political world, this is the word for a political faction or a political party, right? That's why they're called parties. So we usually use the word faction here. So the pars Mariana is the Marian faction, right? Or the Marian party, if you think of them as political parties. So these were the generals of the Marian, meaning related to Marius, the Marian faction. So he had a serious fight against them, ad portam colinam. And this is another situation where we don't really give you the whole story about ad. We always teach you ad means towards, but ad can also just mean at, right? So they had this fight at the Colline Gate, which is one of the entrances to the city. So we're talking about getting real close now. We're very, very close to Rome. And That's why they call this the Civil War, because it's basically happening right in Rome, right in and around Rome. So he held, or he had, Habuit, a very serious battle against Lamponius and Carinas. This is what we call in a positive, the leaders of Marius's faction, and that battle was held at the Colline Gate. Now we're on to the second section. Oh, whoa! Yeah! I like that. Johnny, you still got it. You still got it. Well, Chiasmus, let's go. 70,000 of enemies. And remember, we don't really say, 70,000 of, but in Latin you do. 70,000 enemies in eo proelio contra Sullam fuissa dicontur. So dico here means like are said. I mean, that's the literal translation, right? If it's in the passive. This is a common way of saying there are said to have been. So I don't know grammatically what you call that in English, but we have our subject here, which is the 70,000 enemies in that battle against Sulla. And then we have fuissa, which is a perfect infinitive. And then our verb here is dicontur, so it's present passive. And especially seeing it in the present, which we haven't really seen any verbs in the present, this is how they would say, not if you don't want to definitively declare there were 70,000 enemies, you could hedge your bets a little bit and say there are said to have been. So you kind of separate yourself from it a little bit. There are said to have been, and since it's sum, right, SFUI, we have a predicate nominative here. There are said to have been 70,000 enemies in that battle against Sulla. So the idea here is, in this battle, Sulla was facing an army of 70,000 men. You already know how it's going to turn out, just based on all the other battles that we've read about with Sulla. So there are said to have been 70,000 enemies. And here we go. Duodecimilia. So they are our subject. 12,000 of the enemies. Se, in the accusative, Sullae dediderunt. So dediderunt should kind of remind you of do dare, because that is what it means. Deddo, as opposed to just do, means to give yourself up, essentially. So this is third plural perfect. So 12,000 gave themselves Sullae, to Sulla. So in military terms, we would probably say that 12,000 surrendered themselves. And when we say surrender in English, you don't really need to say surrender themselves, but the word say is there. So 12,000 surrendered themselves to Sulla. Not a bad way to start. And the Keteri, right, the rest of them, so they are in the nominative. Johnny, if you're still there, what do we got going here? In Achaea, we got one ablative. In Castris, another ablative. In Fuga, another ablative. If I were to count those up. Insatiabili ira, this is also in the ablative. Victorum, right, third declension, so that is genitive. Consumpti sunt, third plural, perfect passive. So 12,000 of them surrendered to Sulla. The Keteri, the rest, tricolon, you know it, bro. The rest of them, Keteri, the remainder, consumpti sunt. The rest of them literally were consumed, were killed. In Achaea, in battle. I miss it. I miss you too. You're always welcome. They were killed in battle, in Castries, in their camp. There's no or here, but we would probably want to add it in English. They were either killed in battle, in their camp, or in flight, aka as they were running away. And how were they killed? Ira, by the anger victorum, by the anger of the winners. But it's not just anger, it is insatiabili. They were killed by the, no better English word, insatiable, the insatiable anger of the victors. So 12,000 of them give themselves up. The other 58,000, they're either killed in battle, they're killed in their camp, or they're killed while they're running away. Killed by the insatiable anger of the victors. I love that. This abbreviation CN, that's a first name. That's Gnaeus. Gnaeus Carbo. Consul alter, the other consul. Ab Arimino, from Ariminum, which is a town. Usually, remember to do that. Ad Siciliam, fugit. Third singular, perfect. By the way, when you hit a main verb, it's always a good time to like take a little break. Right? See what you got so far. So we have our subject here, Gnaeus Carbo, the other consul. Gnaeus Carbo, the other consul. Fugit, fled. Ab Ariminum, from Ariminum to Sicily. And I'm not sure what Ariminum is called today. Oh, it's called Rimini. Cool. Now we know. So he runs away from Rimini. What a nice little town. Interesting. So the battle's happening a little bit to the north. Could that be right? Yeah, that's probably where he was. Yeah, so the other consul was hanging out to the north. That makes sense. And he tries to get out of Dodge. I don't know, maybe he went by boat. He's already on the water. And tried to flee down to Sicily. That makes sense. But, unfortunately, Ibi, there, by another Gnaeus, this is like almost, too perfect. Per Gnaeum Pompeium interfactus est. Third singular, perfect passive. We talked about this already, but he runs away from Ariminum to Sicily et Ibi, and there, per a person, through a person, he was killed. So this is what we talked about here with per kind of changing meanings. There, he was killed. I wouldn't say he was killed through Gnaeus Pompey. He was killed by Gnaeus Pompeius. We know him as Pompey. So enter a very important figure in Roman history, and kind of a part of the next generation after Marius and Sulla, and that is Pompey. So Pompey's waiting in Sicily, right? And we'll see a little bit more about Pompey in the next line. And when this consul runs away Pompey's there to greet him, and he ultimately kills him. Now, this whole thing is a relative clause, quem adolescentem, talking about the last figure from the previous line, which is Pompey. So Pompey, quem adolescentem, Sulla, here is my nominative, okay, atque, little conjunction here, atque annos unum et viginti natum. So this word natum, if you look it up, it's going to tell you born or aged, right? Aged 1 and 20 years. So 21 years of age, basically. So we learn that at this time, Pompey is about 21. And this last part here, cognita, in the ablative, eius industria exercitibus, which could be dative or ablative, but praeficio, the way that this verb works, praeficio means to put in charge. So you put an accusative in charge of a dative. So he put, basically Sulla put Pompey in charge of his armies. Third singular pluperfect. So remember, the last line was about Pompey. Pompey. We have whom, and then we have this word adolescentem, a young man. When you have this situation in Latin, it's sometimes good to reverse it and say Pompey, a young man whom Sulla had put in charge. And I might even put this whole 21-year-old thing a little bit earlier. Pompey, a young man, age 21. A young man of 21 years. How about a 21-year-old young man? Yeah, we'll just knock that out. So Pompey, a 21-year-old young man whom Sulla, praeficio, had put in charge of his armies. Praeficio, this is the word praefect, by the way, if you think about BLS, right? A praefect is somebody who's in charge. Whom Sulla had put in charge of the armies. And then the last piece here, we have this ablative absolute, right? When his industry, more on that in a second, had been learned about. So here for industry, like, this is a word that, like, Old English, you might use this word in that way, but industria, like diligence, carefulness, basically skill, right? So we're going for this kind of meaning. I'm just going to go with, like, skill. I think that's a little bit better here. So a young man whom Sulla had put in charge of his armies after his skill had been discovered. I think that sounds pretty good, right? With his skill having been discovered, Sulla put him in charge of the armies at 21 years of age, which is pretty young. And he put him in charge, so this is a continuation. It was such a long sentence, I couldn't really get it all in one slide. So he had put him in charge, ut, so we got some kind of an ut clause here, secundus a Sulla haberator, third singular, this is imperfect subjunctive. Now, I was going back and forth with this ut clause. He put him in charge, I was thinking maybe purpose, so that he would be considered second to Sulla. But that doesn't really feel like purpose. He didn't put him in charge. So then I was thinking, like, result. He put him in charge with the result that he was second to Sulla. I'm not really feeling like a one of those two. So it's probably more result. I think is probably the closest. He put him in charge, right? In such a way that, you know, I mean, this is one of those like really hard ones to translate. With the result that haberate or habeo can mean to consider or to be held. So he was held second from Sulla, which in English we would say second to Sulla. He was considered second from Sulla, second to Sulla is the English way we would say this. So he puts this 21-year-old in charge, and as a result, he's basically his number 2 man, is the idea. So Pompey's, young Pompey is second in command to Sulla. And we're going to see that when Sulla and Marius are out of the picture, their second in commands, right, their proteges kind of pick up the reins. So Sulla kind of passes it off to Pompey, Marius passes it off to Caesar. So Pompey and Caesar are going to be kind of the next generation of the Sulla and Marius struggle. Okay, this one went a little bit long, but it was a big section. So thanks for sticking around, Johnny. If you're still there, always a pleasure, my guy. Thank you so much. I'll see you guys tomorrow.